I'm Dr. Elena Hart. I'm 36, and I've stitched up strangers at 3 in the morning without my hands ever shaking. A year after my divorce, I was leaving a shift near the maternity ward when my ex-mother-in-law spotted me by the elevators. Diane Whitfield had a smile that looked like a door closing. She walked up smug as Sunday and said it loud enough for the nurses to hear, "Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. Now he has a baby boy with your best friend." 6 years of being called the broken one, packed into one breath. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her calm as a flatline and said, "Is that what you believe?" 5 minutes later, a man neither she nor my best friend ever expected walked through that door, and the one name nobody wanted spoken out loud was about to be read in a courtroom. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why that one quiet question I asked her was the most dangerous thing I'd said in 7 years. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories, where calm women face loud cruelty and the truth always collects its debt. If quiet justice is your thing, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Let me back up those 5 minutes, because the smile came before the man did. It was the end of a 12-hour shift, and I was handing off a chart to a nurse named Nate when Diane appeared in the hallway, planted in my path like she'd been waiting all afternoon. Her son's girlfriend had delivered 3 weeks earlier, and the whole Whitfield side of town had been parading through with balloons. I'd braced for that. I hadn't braced for Diane cornering me. She looked me up and down, taking in my scrubs and tired eyes, chin lifting, and that's when she said her piece. Nate went still beside me. My thumb found the thin gold watch on my wrist, my grandmother's, and pressed against its face the way I'd done since I was a girl waiting out something I couldn't change yet. "Is that what you believe?" I asked again, softer. Diane blinked, thrown by the calm. She'd expected tears, not silence. And somewhere down the hall, automatic doors hissed open. I didn't turn yet. I didn't know who was coming. But I knew what I'd already set in motion, and what was coming through those doors would end her son's marriage to a lie he'd told for 7 years. Here's what you should know about me first. I grew up poor in rural Kentucky, where everybody's business is everybody's gospel. I worked through college and medical school on nothing but grit, and I learned to keep my head down and let my work speak, do good quietly, and the truth sorts itself out. That belief made me steady in a trauma bay where panic isn't an option. But it had a shadow side. I carried things alone, and when people started telling a story about me that wasn't true, I made the worst mistake a quiet woman can make. I trusted silence to be enough. I married Mark Whitfield at 28. Charming, the kind of man who made strangers feel chosen. Half the county would have vouched for him, and so would I, for a while. We wanted children. Nothing happened. After 2 years I suggested basic testing for both of us, a routine, the kind of thing I ordered for patients daily. Mark refused, laughed it off, then got sharp, wrapping his refusal in talk about faith and leaving it to God. I pushed twice and let it go, because you can't drag a grown man into a clinic, and because I still believed silence was patience. So I got tested alone. Normal. I sat in my car reading the results, relieved and confused. If it wasn't me, then what was it? I had no answer. And the longer I went without one, the easier it became for everyone else to write their own. Mark had already started whispering to his mother that maybe the problem was me. Diane ran the women's circle at her church like a general runs a campaign. Widowed young, she'd raised Mark alone and decided he was proof she hadn't failed, which meant he had to be perfect. So when he murmured that the trouble was probably his wife, she didn't question it for a second. She picked it up and ran. It started small, a sympathetic sigh at a potluck, a hand on an arm. Then it grew teeth. At a church supper, she introduced me to a visiting pastor's wife with practiced pity. "This is Elena, my daughter-in-law. She's a doctor, you know. Such a shame about the children." Then came the line Diane would repeat for years like grace, "Some women just aren't built for it." She believed it completely, which was the worst part. She was just repeating what her son handed her, polished and certain, with no idea it was a lie wearing her voice. I drove home and said nothing to Mark. I was still waiting for the truth to sort itself out. Paige Connolly had been my best friend since we were 15. She stood up at my wedding, cried during my vows, called me every time things got hard. So when the church gossip wore me down, Paige was who I leaned on, wine on the couch, always the right words. Looking back, every comfort had a hook in it. You're so accomplished, Elena, maybe that's just not your path. You don't need a baby to be whole. Kind words that always landed on the same bruise. I never noticed how her eyes drifted to Mark across a room, or how she somehow knew his schedule before I'd told her. I was too grateful for one person who didn't seem to be judging me to notice she was studying my life instead. People like Paige don't take what's yours all at once, they borrow it piece by piece until one day it's gone, and they're standing in it like it was always theirs. Mark filed for divorce on a Tuesday. I came home to a manila envelope on the counter and a half-empty closet. By the weekend he'd moved in with Paige across town, and the story was already written. Elena was cold, Elena was married to her job, Elena couldn't give him children, and what's a man supposed to do? Diane made sure every pew heard it. Paige said nothing to correct it. The two people who'd known me longest let me become a cautionary tale, and I didn't fight it, because fighting felt like proving them right. I went to work, set a teenager's broken arm, told him he'd be fine. That felt like the only true thing I did all week. If you've ever swallowed a lie about yourself just to keep a family or a reputation intact, you know exactly what that tastes like blood you're not allowed to spit out. The peace I was keeping so carefully wasn't even mine. It belonged to the people lying about me. The story stopped being just about my marriage the day it walked into my hospital. I'd been next in line to run the emergency department, built half the trauma protocols the county still used. Then the whispers reached the credentialing committee. Not the truth, just its shape, unstable personal life, questions about her judgment. A board member who golfed with Mark's uncle started questioning my fitness to lead under stress, as if I hadn't spent a decade staying calm while people bled out in front of me. The job went to someone with half my hours. They called me a strong candidate and called it a difficult decision. They never said the real reason, they didn't have to. I'd grown up in a small town. I knew a verdict dressed as a compliment when I heard one. That night something shifted. A lie about my body had already cost me my marriage. Now it was reaching into the one place I'd never let anyone touch, and I realized the silence I'd been proud of had a price tag, and someone else had been quietly running up the bill. A nurse gave me the name of a lawyer, Ruth Calder, whose office sat above a hardware store. I told her everything, the marriage, the gossip, the job. She listened without interrupting, then said it might be defamation, maybe false light, but it would be hard. We'd need a false statement, proof it spread, and real measurable harm. The harm you've got, she said. A lost promotion is a number. The false part, that's the part you fight in public. They'll claim it's true. You'd have to be ready to prove it wasn't you. My stomach dropped, because a normal test result doesn't say whose fault the silence was, only that it wasn't mine. I almost walked out. Then Ruth said the thing I needed to hear: silence isn't a virtue, Elena, when it's costing you your career. I spent 2 weeks weighing what I'd lose against what I'd already lost by staying quiet, and I came back to one thing: I wasn't doing this to hurt Mark. I'd had a year of chances for that. I was doing this so my name would come up clean. That was the line, drawn on purpose. Not revenge. The truth, said once, where it counted. I called Ruth on a Monday and told her I was in. Good, she said. Then let's make them say it under oath. Ruth drafted the complaint over the following weeks, the dates, the witnesses, the lost salary. My whole quiet humiliation turned into something with weight. When it filed, the news moved through town faster than any ambulance I'd ever ridden. Diane told the women's circle I'd turned vengeful and godless. Mark and Paige stayed quiet. I kept showing up to work and let the case move at the speed of the law, slowly. Ruth told me the next move depended on how they answered. They can call it opinion, hurt feelings, annoying for them, but survivable. Or they plant their flag and call it true. That's the one I'm praying for. I asked why. She smiled like she already knew. Because then they have to prove it. And to prove it, they have to open a door. And the door they were about to open would expose something far bigger than a failed marriage. They took the second road. Mark's lawyer filed a response insisting the statements weren't defamation because they were true. I really had been the reason there were no children, and the fault was medical and mine. When Ruth called to tell me, I could hear delight under her calm. They just said the magic words. Truth is a defense, but to prove you were the infertile one, they'd have to put both your medical records in front of a court. They can't claim the cause was definitely you and then refuse to let anyone look at him. That's a crack. I can work with a crack. For 6 years my body had been up for discussion at potlucks. Now, by trying to win in court, the Whitfields had done the one thing none of them had ever allowed, they'd opened the door to looking at Mark. That night I couldn't sleep, so I went back through the timeline. 7 years earlier, early in the marriage, Mark had driven to the city alone for what he called a routine physical. He came home different, quiet, short with me, pouring a drink before dinner on a weekday, which he never did. When I asked what was wrong he said the doctor was a quack and changed the subject hard. After that day, he never mentioned testing again. And in that same stretch of weeks, the first whispers about me began. At the time I'd filed it away as a man moody over a wasted afternoon. Now, with Ruth's words in my ears, that day looked less like nothing and more like the moment something got decided. I had no proof, just a memory and a bad feeling. But it was enough to tell Ruth where to point. Ruth listened without writing anything down, which meant she was paying close attention. On its own that's nothing, she said, but it's a reason to ask the right question. Because the defense had put my fertility at issue, she could ask the court to compel Mark's own relevant medical records. If he wants to claim it was you, the law lets me ask whether it was him. You can't open a door halfway. She filed the motion. Mark's lawyer fought it hard, and nobody fights that hard over nothing. They argued privacy, relevance, anything to keep that folder closed. I went back to my shifts, setting bones and reading scans, trying not to think about a folder sitting in some city archive that might say everything or nothing. Before the judge ruled, Ruth needed me to sign a verified complaint, every statement, attested under penalty of perjury. I read every line, the potluck, the pastor's wife, Diane's exact words at the supper, the board meeting, the lost salary. Seeing my own quiet years laid out in numbered paragraphs made the lie look as flimsy as it actually was. I signed it clean and certain, the steadiest signature I'd made in a year. Now we wait for a judge, Ruth said. For the first time, waiting didn't feel like helplessness. It felt like a fuse. And once that fuse reached the end, nobody in that family would be able to control what it lit. The ruling came on a gray afternoon mid-shift. I took the call in the supply closet, heart doing the thing it never did at work. The judge granted it, Ruth said, with limits, but she granted it. Because the defense had affirmatively claimed the infertility was mine, the court found Mark's relevant fertility records presumptively discoverable, not public, produced under a protective order, reviewed only by the lawyers and the court. Not a guarantee of anything, Ruth said. We don't know what's in the file. But they can't keep it shut anymore. I stood in that closet and let out a breath I'd been holding for 7 years. Across town, Mark's lawyer reportedly asked for a private meeting that same day. Diane called Ruth's office twice and was told the attorney couldn't speak with her. For the first time, the people who decided what was true about my body went pale at the thought of a court deciding what was true about Mark. The first sign something was wrong on their end didn't come from Mark or Diane. It came from Paige, a text out of nowhere after a year of silence. Please don't do this. Think about the baby. I read it 3 times. We hadn't spoken since the divorce. She'd taken my husband and never once reached out, and now she was begging me to stop a lawsuit that, on its face, had nothing to do with her. People who beg you to stop digging usually know exactly what's buried. I didn't answer. I just sat with the question, and a small, cold certainty that whatever was coming was bigger than I'd let myself imagine. If you've ever found your spine after years of staying quiet, subscribe now, because the next part is the moment everything she'd buried clawed its way back to the surface. The folder came 8 days later. I didn't see it first, I'm a doctor, and there are records I have no right to touch, not even my ex-husband's. It went to Ruth through the proper channel, reviewed with the other side's lawyer present. Then she called and asked me to come in, which she'd never done before. I knew before I sat down. 7 years ago, she said, Mark went to a clinic in the city, the one you remembered. She slid over a single line, the rest sealed. The diagnosis was a word I'd written on charts 100 times, azoospermia. No measurable sperm. Mark had been told, in plain clinical language, that he could not father a biological child. The same week he came home moody and quietly closed the subject forever. The same stretch of weeks the whispers about me began. I sat very still. I didn't cry, didn't shout. Something enormous and quiet rearranged itself inside me, like a bone going back into joint. For 6 years I'd been the broken one, and the man who let an entire town believe that had known the whole time the empty house was his. I drove home with that sheet folded in my bag. I expected triumph. What came instead was grief, 6 years spent absorbing a wound that was never mine, every pitying look, some women just aren't built for it, every night wondering what I'd failed to give. All of it a story Mark wrote to cover a truth he couldn't face, handed to me to wear in public while his mother pinned it on with both hands. Sitting in my car, I said the same thing out loud I'd said to Diane in that hallway. Is that what you believe? Only now I understood what I'd really been asking. I wasn't broken. I never had been. But underneath the relief, a new question rose, one I couldn't push back down, and it was about to blow the entire family apart. If Mark couldn't father a child 7 years ago, and the diagnosis held, then the baby boy Diane had bragged about in that hallway, the son Mark was parading through the maternity ward, the child he'd left me to make with my best friend, could not be his. A man with that diagnosis almost never fathers a child naturally. Which left one of two options: the clinic was catastrophically wrong, or the baby everyone in town believed was Mark Whitfield's son had been fathered by someone else entirely. And suddenly Paige's midnight text made horrible, perfect sense. She wasn't worried about hurting Mark's feelings. She was worried about what a courtroom full of medical records was about to drag into daylight, because Paige knew exactly whose baby it was. I told Ruth there was more in the ground. She didn't even pause. Then let's let the court find it. Not us. The man who walked into the hospital that day had a name, Daniel Cross. During the months Paige and Mark were getting together, Paige had also been involved with Daniel, a quiet man led to believe it was more than it was. When she chose Mark, she cut him off completely, blocked his number, never told him she was pregnant, gambling he'd simply disappear. But the timing never sat right with him, and quiet questions to mutual friends finally got him an answer: the hospital, the date. So he walked through that door to see the child he suspected was his, and the moment he did, Paige's face drained of every drop of color. That's the picture I want you to hold, Diane, smug by the elevators, certain her son's perfect life had proven me worthless, and 5 steps behind her, the living proof that perfect life was built on exactly the kind of lie they'd buried me under for years. Mark knew. That's what turns this from sad to unforgivable. He'd known for 7 years he couldn't father a child, so when Paige got pregnant, he knew with certainty the baby wasn't his, and he took it anyway. He stood in front of his mother and his church and let them believe he'd made the son his barren first wife had failed to give him. He used a child that wasn't his to complete the story that destroyed me. When Ruth told me Mark's lawyer had gone quiet, no more motions, just a request to discuss resolving the matter, I understood why. He wasn't afraid of losing the lawsuit anymore. He was afraid of what it would say out loud about the son he'd been showing off. Diane came to my apartment before the hearing, in her church clothes, looking smaller than I remembered. She didn't apologize. She asked me to drop the suit, not for Mark, for the family, for the baby. For one breath I felt for her, a widow who'd poured everything into one boy, lied to buy her own son for 7 years. Then she said it again, this time as a plea instead of a pronouncement: some women just aren't built for it, Elena. Why drag everyone through the mud? And I understood that even on the edge of the truth, she'd rather protect the lie than release it. Diane, I said quietly, go home. The mud was never mine. She left without another word, and I felt finished, not cruel. Mark's lawyer offered a quiet settlement, a sum, a private retraction to the hospital board, my professional record cleaned, if I sealed everything and never spoke of it again. It's a good deal on paper, Ruth said. Everything you came for. She wasn't wrong. But I thought about it and told her no, not out of spite, because the difference mattered. A private truth was just a quieter version of the same lie. For 6 years they'd said it about me out loud, in churches, at potlucks. The correction had to live in the same place. I'll say it once, where it counts, I told Ruth, and then I'm done carrying it. She capped her pen and smiled. Then we go to court. Where something you can breathe in. And what happened in that courtroom would be the one moment this entire town never stopped talking about. The hearing was held on a bright, cold morning. The room filled the way small towns fill rooms, 2 hospital board members come to see what they'd been wrong about, the church women who'd nodded along to Diane's pity for years, Diane herself rigid in the second row, Mark pale and sweating beside his lawyer, Paige near the back holding herself still, and Daniel 2 rows behind her, a presence she could feel without turning around. I felt the whole architecture of 7 years gathered in one room. For years these people had been the audience to my humiliation. Now they were the audience to something else. Ruth built it the way you build a diagnosis, one finding at a time, calm and unhurried, until the conclusion was the only one left standing. The statements, the dates, the witnesses, Diane's own words repeated at potlucks. The harm, the lost promotion, the documented damage. Then the defense's own claim that the infertility was mine, and the records that claim had forced into the case. Under the protective order, only the necessary line was read aloud. 7 years ago, Mark Whitfield had been diagnosed with a condition that made fathering a biological child medically impossible. The room changed temperature. The church women turned to look at Diane, who'd gone the color of paper. Then Ruth laid the contradiction on the table. The defense swore the empty marriage was my fault, the record said it was Mark's, and there was, by the family's own loud account, a baby boy. She noted plainly, without drama, that paternity testing in a related proceeding had not supported Mark's biological paternity of that child. Mark stood up. "That's not, you can't," his voice cracked across the courtroom. The judge told him to sit. Diane was on her feet too, saying my name like an accusation, saying I'd twisted everything, and then, the way drowning people grab at whatever's nearest, the only words she had left, "Some women just aren't built for it. Some women just aren't." She couldn't finish it the second time. I stood up slowly, because I'd waited 7 years and wasn't going to rush it. I kept my voice flat and clear, the voice I used to tell a family something true and hard. "You're right, Diane," I said. "You're exactly right. One person in this marriage was never built to have children." I let it sit. The file only ever had his name on it. Diane's hand dropped. Mark put his face in his hands. The church women sat there with the truth finally settling over everything they thought they'd known. I wasn't built wrong. I never had been. And the man who'd let an entire town believe otherwise was 6 feet away, falling apart, while the woman he'd called broken stood steady on her own 2 feet. What followed was quiet, and somehow worse for the Whitfields because of it. Mark never denied it again. He sat with his head down while his own lawyer asked for a recess, and when it was granted, he didn't get up. The churchwomen filed out with their eyes down, and by evening the real story would move through town as fast as the lie ever had. Diane followed, smaller than I'd ever seen her, no longer the general of anything. Paige slipped out during the recess, but not before Daniel rose and walked out the same door, close behind her. Ruth put a hand on my shoulder. "You did that without raising your voice," she said. "I've been doing this 30 years. You'd be surprised how rare that is. The measurable things came the way they do. Mark's standing in town simply evaporated. You can't outrun a courthouse in a place that small. He left within a few months, 2 states over, somewhere nobody knew the story yet. A few weeks after the hearing, the hospital board chair asked to see me, with the uncomfortable look of a man who'd believed the wrong thing. The department leadership position was open again, and the earlier concerns about my judgment had been found without foundation. He didn't quite apologize. From a hospital board, close is about all you get. I took the job, not to win one more thing, but because it had been mine, built with my own hands, and I wasn't letting a lie keep it from me a day longer. My first week running the department, I walked into the trauma bay and breathed in that clean, antiseptic smell that used to mean safety because it was the one place nobody called me hollow. It smelled different now. Like a place I'd earned back, not a place I was hiding. Mark left and started over somewhere that hadn't heard the story yet. I don't wish him harm, I don't wish him much of anything, which is its own kind of freedom. Diane lost the thing she'd built her whole self around, not because I took it from her, but because the truth about her son was too big to keep out of a town that size. The women's circle she'd ruled for 30 years quietly moved on without her. I heard she stopped going, and I felt a small, real sadness for that, the sadness you feel for someone who chose the lie right up until it took everything. Paige and Daniel worked out the matter of the baby through the courts, the proper way, and I hope for that child's sake they found something steady on the other side of it. He didn't ask for any of this. Paige and I never spoke again. Some friendships don't break, they just turn out never to have been what you thought, and you set them down with the rest. There was one more thing I did. I wrote Diane a short note, not long, not angry. I'd thought about her standing in my doorway in her church clothes, a woman lied to buy her own son who chose the lie anyway, and I found I didn't want to carry anger into the rest of my life. So I kept it simple, I won't carry your son's lie anymore. You shouldn't either. I never expected a reply, and I never got one. But writing it closed something. That night I slid my grandmother's watch off my wrist and held it, thinking about what she used to say, that patience isn't waiting, it's knowing the right moment when it comes. I'd waited 7 years for that moment. It had come, and I'd met it. And the time that watch had been counting wasn't borrowed against some future reckoning anymore. It was just mine. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: the truth doesn't shout and it doesn't chase. It waits, patient as a watch, for the day someone finally stops being afraid and asks the right question out loud. 6 years of a name that was never mine, and one quiet question that brought the whole thing down. If you've ever been told you were the broken one, let this be your sign to stop carrying it. Tell your truth where it counts, then set it down. If this reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.